recently. The first inspiration for this webinar was the census's annual poverty data release that happened a couple of weeks ago. And the major takeaway of that was that poverty has not declined significantly over the last 4 years, despite the fact that the country is coming out of a recession. And so that raises the question, obviously we're not doing enough about this, what can we do? And National Priorities Project, we look at the federal budget and provide information about the federal budget so that people can influence the nation's priorities. And we think, both some additional questions and possibly some answers. And Coalition on Human Needs, of course, is just a stellar organization that does work in this space. And so they have some ideas about what needs to happen too, especially over the next couple of months. And I'll talk about what's happening with the federal budget process and where we are right now. So the first thing we know is that poverty in the United States right now is still too high, and it doesn't strike at random. In 2014, 1 in 6 Americans were in poverty. That's 46 million people. And among children, that's 1 in 5. Almost 16 million children living in poverty in the United States today. Just so that you can see what poverty means in this context, these are the census definitions of poverty level. As you can see, they're based on family size. So you can see the levels for an individual all the way up to a family of 4. Imagine living with less than $24,000 a year in income with 4 people. And then compare that to the median, where half of US households earn more than $53,000. Of course, that means half also earn below. And we all know that $24,000 for a household of 4 is just nowhere close to a living wage or sustainable wage, and that it's a lot less than what a family needs to get by, especially when you account for the need to work, the need for childcare, the need for transportation, the need for housing. The numbers just don't work out. Another important takeaway from the Census Bureau is that poverty doesn't strike equally. And these numbers, like I said, the overall poverty rate has held mostly steady for the last 4 years. And most of these numbers have also held steady. Some of them have budged a little bit, but not a lot. So among all people, the poverty rate, according to the American Community Survey, which is a little bit different than the official poverty rate, but not too different. Among all people, the poverty rate was a little over 15%, but among non-Hispanic whites, it was closer to 11%. And for Hispanics of any race or Black Americans, it was 24 and 27%, which is really just unacceptable. It's not a new thing, but it's something that could be addressed if we looked at the right programs and if we really adjusted our federal spending in the right places. And I know Debbie will be talking about this idea as well. So, but I want to echo the idea: the economy is not enough. Even though unemployment, the official unemployment rate, has gone down and is now just a little over 5% in the United States, there are still a lot of people who are either not able to find work, have dropped out of the labor market entirely because they haven't been able to find work, or who are underemployed and work part-time or have only worked part of the year. And as you can see on this slide, that is the vast majority of people in poverty, are people who essentially are not able to work enough. The economy is not providing them with the opportunities they need to lift themselves out of poverty. And so we need to do more to make the economy do that. Or to catch people when the economy can't. And there are a few different ways that the federal budget can do that. And I would make an argument that the federal budget is the primary tool that we have to do that. The federal government has tremendous resources. It has the ability to access even more resources. And there are a couple of different ways that could work. When the federal government does decide to step in and do something about poverty, it really works. I know this is also something Debbie will be talking about, and she'll have more information on specific programs and how they help. But just so that you can see here, and this may look familiar if you remember the 50 years of the war on poverty, there was a lot of talk about this, but the poverty level in the United States used to be much higher. And in the mid 60s, when the Great Society programs came in with Medicaid and Medicare and other programs, the poverty rate plummeted, and it hasn't gone back up to the same levels since. These programs really work. They are the reason that that the poverty rate has dropped, and it hasn't been significantly back up above 15%, even in bad economic times since these programs were put into place. So here's an example of one thing that the federal government does that addresses poverty. And this is an important one because the Earned Income Tax Credit, of course, is available to people who are working. And that's what it's all about. And while the Earned Income Tax Credit is a great tool and it really helps people get out of poverty, obviously there is a big movement to underscore that folks who are working shouldn't have the same poverty rates that they do. There shouldn't be so much poverty among people who are working. And it goes back to the issue of so many people being underemployed, so many people not having enough hours at work, or not having high enough wages. And the main thing that the federal budget could do about this, of course, is to exercise its significant ability to create jobs. What we've seen over the last few years with sequestration in place ever since the Stimulus Act, we've seen drastic cuts in domestic spending, and we've seen a failure to step in on the part of the federal government and create jobs where it can in areas like infrastructure, education, healthcare. There's a tremendous ability for the federal government to create jobs, and in many places, the federal government is a significant employer. In most states have somewhere between 5% and on up to almost a third of their wages earned are from federal government employment. And that's just direct federal government employment. Through federal government grants and contracts, there are a lot of other jobs that are supported by federal government spending as well. So we need to be expecting a lot more from the federal budget in terms of job creation and putting money into things that we need, that also create good jobs for Americans. And as you can see, the Earned Income Tax Credit, the vast majority of recipients of the Earned Income Tax Credit are extremely low income and would qualify. Many of them would qualify as being below the poverty level, with well over half of them, almost 3/4, have incomes below $25,000. So between safety net programs that really do a tremendous amount to address poverty and job creation, there is a lot that the federal budget could do. But what do we actually do? This is our National Priorities Project's tax receipt for 2013 for where your taxes went. The average American tax receipt was $12,922, almost $13,000. And out of that, $3,500 went for the Pentagon and related expenses, like nuclear weapons that may not be part of the Pentagon, but are essentially military costs. And that's largely for weaponry and Pentagon infrastructure and Pentagon bureaucracy. Only $759 of those dollars are actually for military personnel. And then you can see our expenditures on other items, $389 for SNAP, only $329 for education, $83 for TANF. So some of these expenses for our safety net are just minuscule compared to what we're spending on the Pentagon and other programs. Of course, Medicaid is not minuscule, but even Medicaid only accounts for half of what the Pentagon accounts for. And then there are tax breaks. So the two places where we put a lot of money in our current federal budget are the Pentagon and tax breaks. And this is just one example. The home mortgage interest deduction, which of course a lot of us probably take advantage of, was about $70 billion in 2013. Compare that to all discretionary spending on housing and community programs, which was only 63 billion. And of the 70 billion in home mortgage interest deduction, over 10 billion of that went to the top 1% of earners. So this shows you where in the federal budget as it is now, this is where our priorities are. This is what we collectively as a nation have chosen to put our money into. And as we all know, today is the beginning of a new fiscal year, and we're starting that year off with the status quo, with the exact same spending priorities that we saw last year that deprioritize domestic spending and put military spending at the top of the list, and also continue a tax policy that really doesn't do enough to address the inequalities that have grown so much over recent decades in the United States. While we have this little hiatus in government spending, we're counting down until December 11th, when the government is due to create a new budget for fiscal year 2016. And 2016, the sequestration cuts that were put in place several years ago and that were suspended through the Ryan Murray budget deal of a couple of years ago, they're due to come back. And there are major contingents in Congress that would like to see those cuts become permanent or those cuts even deepened. And there are 70 days until December 11th for us to influence what happens there. 70 days for us to say that sequestration is not the right policy for the United States, that doesn't allow spending levels on things like education and healthcare and infrastructure and our safety net that Americans need. And that any advanced society needs. And I know Debbie has some really terrific ideas for how we can all jump into this process and try to influence it and make sure that we end up with a federal budget that looks at least a little bit more like what we would all want it to look like. So with that, I will thank you for your attention and turn it over to Debbie.
Okay, I think I'm back. Thank you very much, Lindsay. That was really well put together. And when we do webinars straight through the Coalition on Human Needs, I never get to have my face out there. So I'm taking advantage of this glorious opportunity to wish everyone a happy new fiscal year and embarrass myself by doing this. Okay, that. That we are glad that we have a new fiscal year where we don't have a government shutdown. But all of what we're saying now is going to make it pretty clear that Congress's work isn't done. You've seen me, and now I'm actually going to kind of make myself disappear so you can see the slides a little bit more. And what this is based on a report that we've just put out that is called Economic the Poorest Americans Behind. And we want to thank the National Priorities Project because they created the graphics that you'll see here, except for the silly clip art that you'll see, but they did the serious-minded stuff. So here is a very basic, important message that we want to get out, that, they showed you the very modest gains that we've made in poverty, that we're not making enough progress, and this is meant to show that. So if we were to continue the same rate of reduction in poverty that we got in this past year, uh, very over optimistically assume that we'll keep getting it year after year, it would take 25 years until 2040 to cut poverty in half. That's long. If we want to eliminate the disproportionate poverty among children and get them to that same point, that 7.7% that it would take to get poverty in general half, that would take 35 years until 2049. We can't wait that long. And just as Lindsay said, what this demonstrates really is, even though we've had economic growth, the economy's workings alone are not enough to lift people out of poverty. But effective public programs do work. And I can go fast through this because Lindsay talked about it, but the refundable low income tax credits lift about 10 million Americans out of poverty. 5 million of those are children. Housing subsidies lift 2.8 million out of poverty. There are other examples. Nutrition programs lift 4.7 million people out of poverty. So we know that these programs are effective. All by itself, the economy isn't reaching out and reducing poverty, and that's because economic growth we've had is not shared. The data that just came out, the top 5%, as this shows, their average incomes rose from 325,000, I'm rounding here, in 2000 to 346,000 in 2014. That's all in 2014 dollars, so it is taking inflation into account. And the bottom fifths actually saw, even though this was post-recession when we're recovering, supposedly, the bottom fifth wasn't recovering. Their average incomes dropped from about 12.3 to 11.9. So if we were able to make more progress, this is kind of the 20 million people difference. If we actually put ourselves on a path not to have this quarter century reduction in poverty, but let's say we could reduce poverty, cut it in half by 2020, that would mean there'd be 22 million fewer poor people in this country, even taking into account population. But if we keep going at our current rate, which, as I say, is over optimistic, we don't count on the same level of steady decreases year after year. But if we got that over that same 5-year period, we'd only have a reduction of 2 million. So that's 20 million people staying in poverty who really didn't have to stay in poverty. And why should we care? Poverty costs us a lot. The extent to which people have programs that help, there's a lot of evidence out there as to how much it helps them and helps them contribute to the economy. So children who have had Head Start, nutritious food, secure housing, healthcare, and families that have access to stable jobs and a secure income because of their, in the case of children, better development, better health, less hospitalization, better performance in school. Um, all of these things contribute to them then being able to earn more securely and contribute to the economy. And the same thing in general for families whose adults are working now. They too contribute to shared economic growth. On the other hand, if you make cuts in programs instead of investing, here's one small example. After the SNAP or food stamp cut in 2013, households with babies and toddlers were more likely, 23% more likely, to not be able to afford enough food, to be in households not able to afford nutritious food all the time. That's being food insecure. And because they were more likely to be food insecure, those babies and toddlers were more subject to bad health, falling behind in school, developmental delays, as documented by the research project Children's Health Watch. So these are very high costs for poverty. And yet, instead of investing, uh, or at least instead of investing enough, we've been cutting. And the Coalition on Human Needs has tracked for quite a few years how much we're really spending in a whole set of domestic programs. And here are just some of the examples of the comparison from fiscal 10 through fiscal 15. So again, this is after the recession was over, but during this period, taking inflation into account, we cut some job training programs for adults and youth by 18%, kindergarten through 12th grade education aid for low income communities down 10%, juvenile justice spending 45% or more. There are other juvenile justice programs that are cutting more. Substance abuse treatment programs, 28%. Public housing capital funds so that the housing can be maintained and new units built, cut by a third, home heating aid cut by 40%. Uh, and, and that doesn't even take into account the separate deeper cuts that happened in 2013. I don't know how many word sequestration. I hope it doesn't make you run in the other direction, but it's a further capping of federal funds that happened then. At that time, about 90,000 rental vouchers were lost. Since some of them have been made up, but we're still 67,000 rental vouchers behind. At that, 57,000 children were denied Head Start. Millions of meals to homebound seniors didn't get delivered. Uh, After 2013 and 14 and 15, Congress made a deal to undo some of those cuts. They really reversed most of the cuts in Head Start, so that they could bring those children back into the program. They didn't undo all the cuts in housing that I mentioned. Apart from sequestration cuts, a separate cut in 2013 to SNAP or food stamps reduced the amount per meal from $1.70 per person to $1.40. It was that cut that I just mentioned that had that negative effect on children's health and food security. Um, so we know that we've already had a lot of cuts. Are we going to have more? So Lindsay mentioned that STOP ending that is now in effect through December 11th. Good for us. We didn't have a government shutdown, but this is my attempt to depict a member of Congress kicking the can down the road. So they kicked it through December 11th, but they better get to work a lot sooner than that. Because it takes a while to create a deal. Will they make a deal the way they did in 14 and 15 to get out from these cuts, these sequester caps, so we can make some modest investments? Or will they make a bunch of cuts, uh, a revisiting and worsening of the cuts that we've done before? Um, is a head smacker that they would even consider making such cuts. So the kind we're facing, Congress, the House and Senate have proposed budgets that would allow the tremendous benefits of the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit improvements that have expire that would let 16 million people, 8 million children into poverty. I talked about those rental housing vouchers. We still remember have those 67 vouchers than we had before the last round of cuts. If the Senate version of their spending actually became law, we lose on top of that another 50,000, even though only 1 in 4 people who qualify, households who qualify, are now able to get that kind of help. So don't want it to go in the direction of more cuts. Uh, we've got some leverage here. The president has been extremely firm over and over again. He has said he will veto bills that don't go beyond these cuts. And we want to strengthen the president's hand in this. We need, and we're told over and over again from allies in Congress, that they need to hear from constituents to light the fire under getting a better deal. Um, so it's not impossible. Just think of all the choices Congress has made. They give these extra tax breaks for hedge fund managers. This is such an egregiously unfair extra 1.4 billion per year that they get, that several Republican candidates for president have said they would do away with this extra break. That amount of money would pretty much pay for the full day, full year Head Start expansion that the president has proposed and that we know would help more children to do better. Um, so here's an example of ways that you can weigh in. Um, I've just detailed a lot of what's in our national version of the report. We are working with state groups in the states that you see listed on the screen to to release reports uh, in those states. When these groups release reports, it would be a tremendous help if you're in one of those states or if you have networks in those states, if people tweeted out, emailed out, shared around the reports. If the reports get any press attention, write a letter to the editor about it. Uh, um, we have packets that we're developing that include the Twitter handles of everybody in the congressional delegation from all of those states. So we make it very easy for anybody who wants to take part, and tweet the link to the report and encourage uh, your delegation to stop the cuts. That's just one very easy way to get the word out and to demonstrate to Congress that there are people out there paying attention who care. New Hampshire is one of the states that has put out their report so far, and these are just some of the great graphics that National Priorities Project created that from the report that show the consequences of failing to do the right thing and the good uh, advantages if we are able to restore programs. So if you have networks in those states, share the report by tweeting, by emailing about it, uh, write letters to the editor or blog about it. And if you want to be able to do those things, uh, Kelly Wilkins on our staff wants to hear from you, and there's her email address. You can ask her for the information, and she'll send it all out to you. If you're not in those states, wherever you are, you can let your rep and senators know you want them to stop cuts and start investing. If you go to our website, there's an email up there right now that was updated just today, based on knowing that we don't have a shutdown and we have a stopgap spending bill. But the message is basically the same: get to work, create a deal, stop the cuts, and start investing. So if you go to our website, you can send easy to do email or write your own blog letter, attend town meetings with candidates. You know how to take action. But we really need you to do it. So thank you. Please sign up to get our emails at our website. If you don't already, contact me directly. I'm trying to share the love and appreciation of the work that everyone does, and appreciation for your listening. So that's it for me. Lindsay?
Okay, thank you. I think my video is coming back. There I am. So we'll be taking questions now. I know we have some coming in being typed, and some people look like they're raising their flags. I'm going to start taking them. They may not be quite in order, but we have one from John Lent who typed in a question about the poverty rates. So among people working, I think, or work status and poverty rates. So I'm going to go back to this slide. So this slide, I think, is the question. So these are poverty rates among these groups. So among those who worked full-time year-round, the poverty rate was only 3%. Among those who worked part-time or part-year, the poverty rate was almost 19%. Among those who didn't work at all, the poverty rate was over 23%. I would interpret this as showing us a couple of things. One is that work really is a way out of poverty, which underscores the need for us to make sure that we have an economy where people who want to work and can work are able to work, and that jobs are available. And the economy is not doing that on its own. There are a lot of people who are being left out of this economy, either through not being able to find a job at all or through being unemployed. The other message is that we do need a safety net for those people who are not able to find work or who are not able to work. Or who are between jobs for any number of reasons. We need those safety net programs. And as Debbie showed really well, and as I talked about, those safety net programs really work. And so I think those are we need two pieces. We need both of those pieces, and both of those involve federal investment in order to bring the poverty rate down from where we know it is today, and which is still too high. We have another question. Is it possible to make Twitter handles available for all members of Congress, even if a report's not done in our states? We can tweet our elected officials to know we're concerned.
Well, we have been gathering state by state, and it takes a little effort to do that. So, but I believe that the National Partnership for Women and Families has on their website a tool where they have a bunch of suggested activities that is set up so whatever state you're in, it will know how to communicate that way. So you might look for National Partnership for Women and Families and see if maybe that is a way so that you can directly reach your member of Congress. We will be attempting to develop that kind of tool for ourselves as soon as we can, and we'll get more information out as rapidly as we can so that we cover all the states. But the first ones we did were the ones where we have these reports.
I'll just speak up that Meredith Dodson just chatted us that there are Senate Twitter handles available, and she sent a link. I think we'll have to try to send that out via email or something to the entire list. It's govsm.com/w/Senate has Twitter handles for Senate members, apparently.
Terrific. Meredith Dotson is a repository of much vital information, I know. And are you going to send a follow-up email to the people who've signed up for this?
Yes, we will send a follow-up email, and that relates to our next question is copies of the slides. We will send a follow-up email. Is it all right with you, Debbie, if we share the slides?
Oh, yeah.
With the, okay, we'll share the slides that way, and we'll also put them up on the National Priorities Project website, possibly as soon as tomorrow, but possibly not until Monday. But
yeah,
we'll send out via email.
We'd be very glad to put both the full recording and the slides on our site too, so everybody should be able to get the slides.
Great. We have another question from Pamela Berger. Does the group which did not work include retirees who presumably may have Social Security? No, the group that does not work, that would be out of people who are considered part of in the labor market. So that would not include retirees. And I think we have apologies for the delay. I'm just working on, we have some people who are asking to be unmuted.
You're trying to get.
Yes, I am trying to.
Yeah.
Okay. We're having a little problem with that, but we have some more typed questions. From Mavis Britwam for Debbie, she says, could you please elaborate a bit more on the first graph you presented? Is the solution to cutting poverty in half by 2020 to depend on the economy and the government programs working together?
That's exactly the right message. Let's see if I can, oops, I should go the other direction. Sorry, bear with me here, we're just about there. So this is an exercise, really. It assumes that if every single year from here on out through 2040, we could count on the same percentage point reduction in poverty that we got in this past year from 2013 to 2014, that's how long it would take to cut poverty in half. And this is a pretty clear demonstration of the inadequacies of just the workings of the economy, because this is based on the official poverty line, which doesn't count some of the benefits programs that we've shown have a tremendous anti-poverty effectiveness. Doesn't count those tax credits that lift 10 million people out of poverty. Doesn't count SNAP benefits that lift 4.7 million people out of poverty. Those kinds of things are not in here. So this is more related to the workings of the economy than perhaps a more sophisticated measure that would take much more into account. So why is this over optimistic? Do we really think over the next 25 years we're not going to have, if not a recession, at least some kind of economic downturn? And we certainly know that when the economy goes down and unemployment goes up, poverty goes up. So I think we'd be most over optimistic to think we could get this, but this is the best we could hope. So if the point of the question is we need a combination of a strong economy where more and more people can get jobs, but we also need the supports of government programs that do number one, they help people get jobs. They prepare them, whether it's education and training, work supports like childcare, and they also augment people's incomes through things like the tax credits or SNAP benefits or Social Security or many other things. The combination of government programs, and clearly it's very hard to reduce poverty if you don't have economic that creates more jobs. Those things together would really reduce poverty.
All right, we have another question from Catherine Hoffman, who says, I have a question about the political process and nonprofits' ability to spend some time on advocacy and direct acts that are political in nature. If the federal and many state houses keep being won by conservative Tea Party voices and votes, then all the advocacy in the world won't help outcomes for those left out. Would you recommend that nonprofits like CHN, NPP, and CLASP, CBPP, et cetera, apologies to those who don't know what those acronyms are, but I think we get the idea, start talking about the need to not split tickets and to vote for those for Congress and state houses, usually Dems, who will vote for spending on social needs. I can answer that for NPP and just say that, National Priorities Project we are a nonprofit organization, and for those who know what it means, we are a 501c3 tax status, which means that we are not able to endorse candidates or certainly political parties. We would lose our tax status. We also, for even bigger reasons, choose to be nonpartisan so that we can make sure that we provide information that is both unbiased and seen as unbiased, so that it's of use to the broadest number of people. So I think NPP will not be stepping into that work anytime soon.
Right. We have the same tax status and we have the same constraints against, going anywhere near electoral campaigns. And so that is work in a democracy. That is work that people should be doing. So we'll have to have a division of labor. We're not going to be doing that. But that doesn't mean that we're not able to take positions on legislation. It doesn't mean we're not able to point out the consequences of decisions that Congress makes, or we don't work at state legislative level, but many of you may. We're allowed to do that. The extent to which we specifically say or urge people to vote yes, or tell their members of Congress to vote yes on something or vote no on something, that's lobbying, and we can do some of that, but we can't spend the majority of our budget on that. But within the constraints that we have, we are well able to be out there advocating and holding members of Congress accountable for the choices that they make. So we feel that an educated electorate will on their own make better decisions. And this is the role that we can play. And we certainly respect that there is other kind of work that other groups need to do.
I also want to point out for anyone who wants to try to access this, down in the lower right of your screen, there's a little speech box. If you click that, you will see one of the options in this chat box is for group chat, which is sort of a gray box. And there are the links for Senate Twitter handles and House Twitter handles in that window. If you can't find that or can't see it, we'll also be emailing it out. So it may be a little bit hard to get to for some folks. We have another question from Pat Albright, who says, the other issue here is what a disaster TANF has been. The work of mothers and caregivers needs to be valued and supported, and we need to take action to change welfare policies such as to press for the Rise Out of Poverty Act, which Representative Gwen Moore from Milwaukee had introduced in the past Congress and needs to be reintroduced in the present Congress. RISE would make ending child poverty the goal of welfare policy, raise benefits, get rid of the most punitive aspects of the current policy, etc.
Hear, hear. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Recently, a book has been published called $2 a Day, which has done a lot of intensive interviewing of families that are living on, in this country, less than $2 per person per day. And a big point of the book is that the failure of TANF to reach lowest income families with children is directly related to more people living at these levels of extreme poverty, which is a shameful situation. And certainly Representative Gwen Moore is a great champion, and rebuilding TANF would be extremely important thing to do. For a short while, it looked like there could even be some bipartisan interest in making some improvements in it, not as much as needed, at least recognizing that people ought to have more access to a broader range of education and training. And they put out a kind of what they called a discussion draft bill, they being the Republican majority on a House. But lately we seem to have indications that the more right-wing members are not interested. And so it's to be in this line of work, you have to be able to be hopeful. We had some hopes there, but they're not as high as they were. But raising the issue is extremely vital, and recognizing that when this very basic area of not there, making sure that other supports are especially protected, SNAP, for instance, all the more important. But anyway, the caller makes the right point.
Hear, hear. We had a raised flag from Anne Grelecki, but Anne, it looks like I'm not able to unmute you, so you may not have audio working on your computer. If you want to type us a question, be happy to try to answer it. Any other questions? I don't see any right now, and we're coming up on 3 o'clock. So that's good timing then. If Anne pops up here in the next minute, we'll jump back in and get her question. But otherwise, thank you all for participating. I hope that those of you who are so inclined will go to the Coalition on Human Needs website and take action in some of the ways that have been suggested. And we hope that we'll be back here in a couple of months, celebrating some good budget developments for fiscal year 2016.
Right. Thank you very much, everybody. Emails and contact Kelly Wilkins or me to get more information. We're hoping on October 8th to have a conference call, especially meant for people who are in those states, and that we have these reports. If you are in those states or know people who are, contact Kelly Wilkins and we'll send you the information about that. But we really appreciate your speaking out on these really important priorities.
All right, thanks everyone. With that, we will conclude and enjoy your Thursday and the beginning of fiscal year 2016.
Happy
I wish I had a noisemaker, but I didn't come that well prepared.
but I already compromised my dignity.
All right.